Welcome back to the channel. We're going over the SP 500, the Nasdaq 100, exactly how we moved today. We had a pretty nasty and steep drop near the end of the day, right after lunch. And we need to talk about exactly what's happening and how we're looking at this market going into the next trading day. Before we get into that, I have to ask you to consider doing two things: liking and subscribing. I'm posting these videos for you every single day, so you know what's going to happen on the market, and hopefully you can make money trading this as well. Let's get to it. Now, when I get into this, I want to highlight some things that I was talking about. Now, I made a few comments on Twitter a little bit earlier, and I like to keep myself pretty accountable just before we go any further. Today, for me, was a losing day. I lost actually a little bit more, about $1,000 on the day, but I like to show my losers as well as showing my winners here, right? So I do want to post that. Now, looking at the market, what's happening? So basically, beginning of the day, basically since 8:30 till around 12 lunchtime, give or take, you had beautiful movement. And in my opinion, this was the move that you had about 8 a.m.s right here to right here. Nothing but really upside. And you're really sitting and trending at this range at locally 12.2, ready to get that breakout, right? This was really interesting just overall on how this was developing. Now, where we opened up on the week from the futures, because this is where you closed previously, was right here. So we got some of the anticipated upside, but it didn't hold through. And like I mentioned, though, on this range, and I personally made a mistake, and I want to really clarify what I was looking for and why I was looking at it. So the reason why I even considered grabbing some calls, and I did it on Microsoft, was because Microsoft was so weak on the day, and I started grabbing those calls locally right here. We wrote it to the top, and unfortunately, I was up about 15-20%. I just wanted to hold those a little bit longer to hit a specific target. Didn't hit. I paid the consequences for that trade, right? Now, going back here, what am I looking at? As we're looking at this range, we need to talk about some key levels here. Firstly, on the 4-hour, I want to highlight what's happening here. You're definitely looking like you want to try to break out to that upside, but you just keep failing 1, 2, 3. Again, fundamentally, it has every reason to be going down. The short-term aspect, we wanted the upside. We saw some upside maybe coming in the short term, but it really couldn't get there. Now, what I've been saying, and today obviously was not practicing what I was preaching, was if you're coming to these key levels, continue to just trade these zones that you continue to get in, or the ranges that you're in. So from a pure technical standpoint, 1, 2, 3, you're playing the rejection down. A lot of people in Discord, congratulations, you listened and you kind of stayed with the real technicals there, and you said, Tyler, I'm not going to follow you into any of these calls. So some people made money on those plays. Congratulations. You push back down, you hit locally 8.5. In my opinion, the bottom of this level is about 11,800, 11,750. We've talked about this a lot here on the channel, but we'll basically give it out about 100-point level that you're watching right here on NQ. And then you have this median level about 12,000, which is just a significant range that you could not hold above. We go back to the 15-minute, you can actually see some of the rejections we saw here. You came below, you sat, rejected, boom, continue down. So as I'm looking at this, the writing was on the wall for sure here. This was a bonehead play on my end. As you're sitting up at this triple top, it was a clear shorting opportunity. And really what did it for me was when we go to Bookmap and I show you what we were seeing here overall. Now on Bookmap, as you can see, nothing but downside here. What I want to highlight though is what happened prior to that downside, right? And what happened was right here. Before you get a lot of upward momentum on CVD, trending up pretty much all day, kind of double topping there. But you started to see, and you only were seeing really, were buy orders here. You saw some medium size here around lunchtime, and then you started really dropping after those buys came in. And then at the end of the day, you started seeing more interesting things. Around 2 o'clock, you have a big buy order, about 2,000 lots, another massive order, roughly 2,600 lots, and then another one right here around 1,600 lots. So you're seeing them all come in pretty crazy. I mean, you had a lot of buying power coming in at the end of the day. And this leads me to believe you're going to see a lot of interesting and a lot of volatile movement based on this right here. And this is this week's earnings. It's earnings season. We talked about this previously on Saturday. You have Netflix tomorrow after close. You have Tesla after close the next day. You have a lot of action coming in here, and then it's going to be even bigger next week. You have more and more just rallying in. This is going to set the tone for really what's happening in the market. Are we really stalling on growth? Are we going to, we still seeing growth? What's happening? But we saw banks really get hurt, and I'm not saying those drug the market down, but those so far, if you're looking at XLF, that ETF, most of these stocks, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, they're all net down on the year, and they're really cutting into those profits. So looking at that, I have to be concerned. But what I'm looking at here is how is this level going to hold up going into tomorrow? Most likely you get this test of some level of this range either tomorrow or in the pre-market tonight. I want to highlight that. So what I'm going to be looking for is how do you react to this 11,800, 1175 locally? If you start trending below this range, I'm going to be looking for maybe a break of this overall trend. This is the 4-hour trend. You can see it just holding right there right now. So I'd probably start looking for a break of this trend if you by some chance get pushed below. So say you come down, you retest, you hold below. At that point, I may start playing puts and shorts to see if we get a break down below this, and they could start breaking pretty rapidly if you do start making a lower low at these range. So you got to be looking at those key levels. Now, the weakest overall movement of the day, in my opinion, comes out to ES. And ES overall looked weak pretty much all day long. As we come in here, you can see, yes, we'll bring in open so you can see what happened on the day. But basically, this is pre-market. This is after hours and Sunday night, yada, yada, yada. Everyone knows about this right here. Then you kick into today. And this is essentially where markets open up right here. This is right where you open up on the day. This is the market open. And ES never got higher than that. And this probably should have been a major red flag for me. But I, again, was tunnel vision looking at the market right now. And again, sometimes you start to see things that you want to see. And I wasn't paying attention to the big signals out there. And ES all morning long was extremely weak, even before lunch. So on ES, you started seeing a massive dip even before NQ, right? So ES was dipping. We go back to NQ, you were actually going up, right? So we'll go really quick back to NQ, bring that back up. And you can see at that market open, you were pushing back up, double topping. Again, we go back to ES, you can see what was happening here. You never even double top, you just continued to making lower highs and broke down. Big signal right here. We should have been paying attention. This was a huge, huge, huge thing that I missed personally on the day. And now I'm looking at this. I'm like, man, you're coming back down to each of your key levels and you're bouncing right now. But most likely, if we continue below these, you're going to start seeing more and more downside. So again, NQ is the big thing to be looking at here. And it's going to be this range right here. How do you respect 11.8 to 11.85? If you can hold above this range, you look good for probably a bounce back to the 12,000 region. If you get below this or you even get in this range, I probably won't be looking for anything until you get below and close below 11.75 for pushes to the downside. That's me personally. Looking at SPY, a lot of people having questions here. SPY, again, nothing but downside all day long. It really was just holding on that down. You had that initial gap up and then boom, you just push back down. You can never get a test of 390 or 392. Big red flag there for myself looking at that as a whole. Going into Big Six, what's happening with the bigger names in the market? Now, this still looks really interesting if you're looking at this all things considered on the daily chart. In my opinion, you are desperately trying to hold this level. You're still trying to make higher lows as well as you're looking at this range. However, you are getting a breakout to the upside and you haven't got a breakout to the downside, and there's a lot of room to go back down. These could easily keep coming back down. If you know the big six, you have Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Google, Amazon, and Tesla all lumped into the one little ETF. That's what's going on there. So overall, I am anticipating some slower movement to possible downside, most likely into this range tonight, going into 11.85 down to 11.75. That's most likely where we're going to be tracking into the after hours and pre-market. Question is, how do you respond from these levels? Now, again, I want to go back to these earnings right here. You have Halliburton, some Lockheed Martin. None of these are really big ones in my opinion. I think what's going to really set the tone, IBM is pretty decent, but it's going to be Netflix is going to start setting the tone for tech overall with Roku and some of these other names. You started seeing big names get affected the last time Netflix had earnings as well, and they missed. We saw them greatly affected. So you want to keep an eye on Netflix and how their earnings come out tomorrow, and I'll be watching that very closely, and most likely mentioning it in this video come out tomorrow. Tesla as well, again. So we're going to start seeing how are we setting up overall. And these are going to be very big things across the board, and that's going to be the major question mark here. And we don't really have too much news this week. Again, next week is going to be GDP. Next week are the rate hikes. None of that's happening this week, but we're going to see how is the market establishing growth, or is it going to continue with this negative growth sector and continue pushing towards that downside? Now, again, there was a lot of red flags, and I got to keep mentioning that I just missed them today. Yeah, going to Discord losses, I take my losses seriously, and there were red flags all across the walls today. You go into junk bonds, one of the best indicators for what's happening in the market. Junk bonds came back to this key level, 1, 2, third test. And ultimately, since open, they gapped up and it was nothing but downside. Literal downside, retesting back to that level and then pushed back down. So as I look at this, it's like I should have saw this on the wall. I should have saw the put signs everywhere. But again, I was just looking for that breakout, and I was definitely being biased with my trading today. Definitely not looking at it from a clear perspective. You saw yields get a little bit of a bump up here as well. We want to see more if you want to see some more downside, but you are making a hard bottom here as well. And I want to highlight what this looks like. So you're seeing that hard bottom right there. As we come out to the 4-hour chart, I want to highlight how this looks very similar to what you had down here. See, but you had a little bit of a pop up right here to where now you're making the bottom, but you had the bottom before the flag right there. So I'm interested to see if yields start pushing back up. If they start pushing back up, this is definitely cueing us for another major drop, and I will definitely be watching out for that. But people are really concerned about the market right now. I don't think this was necessarily a very quote unquote bearish setup of a day, but I do believe you need to be paying high attention to what's happening in this range, 1185 to 11800. Now going to cheddar flow, what's happening here with calls, puts, etc. Looking at Qs, put to call ratio very high in favor of puts, betting on the downside. Going into SPY, what's happening here? 1.7, same ratio, a lot of puts coming in overall. VIX, we need to talk about VIX as well, 1.8. This is one of the biggest question marks in my opinion, but it's going to give you a better look when you look at VIX right here. So we look at VIX, and VIX continues to hold this key level at $24. And as we know, as VIX drops, typically the market goes back up. When you get a bullish little rally or something to the upside. When VIX goes up, typically the market goes down. As you're here, I think you have to anticipate that VIX might want to push up. Might want to get some volatility to the upside. If you start to break below this $24 level, I would get pretty bullish as a whole on the market and start expecting some volatility towards the upside. But as of right now, VIX is just sitting at this $24 region. And as long as it stays here, it still has to have you on the edge of your seat when it comes to having calls or anything to the long side of this. But looking at this as a whole, I want to highlight that I wouldn't be too discouraged if you got, psyched out on this trading day. Overall, I did like what was happening. And when you're getting this type of consolidation at these highs, typically you break out over. For example, what happened back here? We can keep going back to previous for instances and looking at what's happening. Consolidate at these levels here. The next day, boom, you shot up. This actually was pre-market. So pre-market, you consolidated at those highs, came down, market opened, and boom, you shot up. Market opened again right here. Consolidated at highs, boom, shot up. So you have to take it as you get it. It is what it is. You didn't really get a clear rejection like these. These were just clear rejections. You literally consolidated at highs for about 3 to 4 hours of the trading day. You have to take that as bullish sometimes. And it's one of those trades, like I said in Discord, it was worth losing on for me because the upside was there. Now, again, looking at some of these bigger names going in the market, looking at some of the stronger names going out there. Microsoft, if you get below this key level right here, break below 253 roughly, most likely you're going to come down and start testing this range at around 250, 251. Looking at Netflix is the biggest question mark on the week. If they perform with any type of good earnings, they're going to go absolutely ballistic. I want you to know that. So if you get any type of good earnings and you get above 206, 207, look for them to start pushing back to 250. It's going to get absolutely crazy if their earnings are any type of good. Going over to Meta, big one, something I'm watching. I'm looking for them to get a retest of this range down here, about 164.5 to 165. That's where I have them coming down. And then from there, you'd be looking for a bounce back up to the range of like 168, possibly 170, 171. Be looking at that for there. Going into Apple. Apple really wasn't a good trading day. Again, another major red flag on the day was Apple trending sideways to the upside, but at 11 o'clock, before the market started dropping, Apple started tanking. Or not tanking, but it started dropping from those highs before everything else did. Major red flag, always watch Apple. Apple, I'm looking for this to come down to locally 145, 145.5, roughly this range right here, the previous weekly level. But ultimately, as a whole, we have to be looking at this market. I'm sitting on my hands. I'm just waiting right now. I have to take a step back, go into Discord, reevaluate what we're looking at in the market, and set myself up to win in this market. Because right now, when I look at what happened today, I have to acknowledge that today was a mistake on my end, with grabbing those calls and definitely not taking the profits when I have them when you're sitting at this level up here. Major mistake on my part. Have to be transparent with it. But what I'm looking for tomorrow, coming down 11,800, 11,850, that's what I'm looking for. How you react. If you start to bounce and you hold this level, I'm looking bullish to come back to 12,000, 12,040, which is locally that monthly level as well. If you get below this level, what are we looking for? We're looking for downside break and a lower low to be made on this trend as well. If that happens, you're looking pretty gnarly for some downside. But again, the big thing you need to be watching too, or how are expectations? How are the outlooks for these earnings? Netflix, Tesla. You have big earnings coming. We need to understand what is happening with these. Snapchat. We want to see what's happening with social medias so we can see and anticipate what's going to happen with Facebook and going forward there as well, so we can anticipate with the growth of some of these other companies as well.